My parents announced at a family dinner that they were cutting me out of the inheritance. Everyone laughed. I smiled, took a sip, and left. 2 days later, the family chaos that followed left them all in shock. Subscribe to the channel and like the video to see more stories like this. My parents invited me to a fancy family dinner with all my relatives. Then my father stood up and announced to everyone, "We've decided to cut you out of the inheritance. You've never deserved it." Everyone laughed and agreed. I smiled, took a sip, and quietly left. 2 days later, complete family chaos. I'm Adrian Blake, 34 years old, and until that Thursday evening at Belmont Manor, I believed family meant something more than bloodline and bank accounts. The dining room was decorated with fresh orchids and expensive candles. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the mahogany table where 23 of my closest relatives sat, dressed in their finest clothes for what my mother called an important family gathering. I should have known something was wrong when my younger brother Marcus smirked at me as I walked in, or when my sister Diane avoided my eyes completely. But I was too focused on the inheritance envelope I'd brought with me, the one containing documents that would change everything I thought I knew about our family. My father, Richard Blake, 68 years old and still commanding every room he enters, stood at the head of the table. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his navy suit pressed without a single wrinkle. My mother, Catherine, sat beside him in an emerald dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She wore the diamond necklace my grandmother had given her, the same grandmother whose death 6 months ago had triggered tonight's gathering. "Thank you all for coming," my father began, his voice carrying that practiced authority he'd perfected over 40 years of running Blake Industries. "As you know, we've gathered to discuss the distribution of Eleanor's estate. Grandmother Eleanor, the woman who raised me when my parents were too busy building their empire, the woman who taught me to read, who sat with me through every childhood illness, who believed in me when no one else did. Her passing had left a hole in my life that still ached with every breath." I reached for my water glass, my hand steady despite the growing unease in my stomach. Around the table, my relatives leaned forward with hungry eyes. Uncle Thomas and Aunt Patricia, my cousins Jennifer, Robert, and Michael, Diane's husband Stephen, Marcus and his wife Vanessa, all of them watching my father like sharks circling prey. "Eleanor left very specific instructions," my father continued, pulling out a leather folder. "She wanted her estate divided among those who truly embodied the Blake family values. Hard work, dedication, loyalty." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room before landing directly on me. Something cold settled in his expression, something I'd never seen directed at me before. "Which is why, after careful consideration and consultation with the family, we've decided to cut Adrian out of the inheritance. He's never deserved it." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't process what I'd heard. Cut me out. Never deserved it. I'd worked alongside my father for 12 years, building Blake Industries from a mid-sized manufacturing company into an international corporation. I'd sacrificed relationships, health, and countless hours to prove myself worthy of the Blake name. But it was the laughter that truly broke something inside me. It started with Marcus, his head thrown back in genuine amusement. Then Diane joined in, her hand covering her mouth in mock sympathy. Uncle Thomas slapped the table, his booming laugh echoing off the walls. One by one, every person at that table laughed at my expense, at my humiliation, at what they believed was my downfall. My mother didn't laugh, but she didn't defend me either. She simply looked away, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap, as if my existence had become too uncomfortable to acknowledge. "Adrian has always been the weak link," Marcus announced, still grinning. "Remember when he wanted to pursue music instead of business? Or when he dated that girl from the wrong side of town? He's never truly been one of us. I always said he took after Catherine's side of the family," Aunt Patricia added with a sniff. "No real backbone, no ambition." Cousin Jennifer leaned across the table, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Maybe now you'll finally understand your place, Adrian. Some people are born to lead, and others are born to follow. You've always been a follower." Each word was carefully chosen to wound, to diminish, to erase 12 years of dedication and a lifetime of trying to earn their approval. They'd planned this, I realized. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This was orchestrated humiliation, designed to break me in front of everyone who mattered. I could have argued. I could have defended myself, listing every achievement, every sacrifice, every late night and early morning I'd given to the family business. I could have reminded them that Blake Industries' 3 most profitable divisions were ones I'd personally developed and managed. I could have fought. Instead, I smiled. Not a bitter smile or a forced one. A genuine, calm smile that seemed to confuse several people at the table. I reached for my wine glass, took a slow, deliberate sip of the $2,000 Bordeaux my father had selected for tonight's celebration, and set it down with careful precision. Then I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked toward the door. Behind me, the laughter continued, joined now by relieved chatter about how the inheritance would be divided among the real Blake family members. No one called after me. No one asked me to stay. No one seemed to care that they'd just severed a 34-year relationship with words that could never be taken back. As I reached my car in the circular driveway, I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls. The first was to my lawyer, Daniel Morrison. The second was to my accountant, Sarah Chen. The third was to my grandmother's private attorney, a woman named Margaret Winters who'd been trying to reach me for weeks, but whom I'd been too busy to call back. "Ms. Winters," I said when she answered, "I'm ready to discuss my grandmother's private instructions, the ones she left specifically specifically for me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, Mr. Blake, I've been hoping you'd call. There are things about your grandmother's estate that your father doesn't know. Things she made me swear to keep confidential until you were ready to hear them. I leaned against my car, looking back at the lit windows of Belmont Manor where my family was probably already celebrating their victory. I'm ready now. Tell me everything. What Margaret revealed in the next 20 minutes changed everything I thought I knew about my grandmother, my family, and the inheritance everyone assumed was theirs to distribute. Eleanor Blake hadn't just left an estate. She'd left a legacy, one that had been hidden for decades, one that made the family fortune look like pocket change, and one that she'd entrusted entirely to me. But more than that, she'd left evidence, documentation of every questionable business dealing, every corner cut, every law bent or broken that had built the Blake family empire. She'd spent the last 10 years of her life quietly compiling proof of things that would destroy reputations, end careers, and possibly result in criminal charges. And she'd given me the choice of what to do with it all. Your grandmother knew this day would come, Margaret said softly. She knew they'd try to cut you out, to diminish you, to make you feel worthless. She wanted you to understand that their approval was never what mattered. What mattered was who you truly were when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose. I thanked Margaret and ended the call. For a long moment, I sat in my car, processing everything I'd learned. My grandmother hadn't just believed in me. She'd protected me, prepared for me, and given me the power to either save or destroy the family that had just cast me aside. 2 days. That's how long I decided to wait. 2 days to let them celebrate their victory, to divide up what they thought was their rightful inheritance, to solidify their belief that I was nothing without the Blake name. 2 days before, I showed them exactly what I was capable of. The next morning, I woke up in my downtown apartment with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. No more chasing approval, no more trying to prove myself to people who would never see my worth. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with the documents Margaret had couriered over at midnight. The inheritance my family had fought over at dinner amounted to roughly $8 million. My grandmother's house, her investment portfolio, some jewelry, and a few pieces of art. Substantial, yes, but nothing compared to what Blake Industries was worth. Nothing compared to what they thought they were entitled to. What they didn't know was that Eleanor Blake had been far wealthier than anyone suspected. In the 1950s, she'd invested in a small technology company that became one of the giants of Silicon Valley. She'd quietly bought property in areas that later became prime real estate. She'd made smart, patient investments over 60 years that had compounded into a fortune of over $300 million, and she'd left every cent of it to me. But the money wasn't what made my hands shake as I read through the files. It was the other documents. Spreadsheets showing how my father had embezzled from Blake Industries. Emails proving that Marcus had been feeding confidential information to competitors. Bank statements revealing that Uncle Thomas had been skimming from the employee pension fund for 15 years. My grandmother had documented everything. Every illegal kickback, every fraudulent tax claim, every instance of insider trading. She'd been building a case against them for over a decade, collecting evidence with the methodical patience of someone who'd watched her son and his family become exactly the kind of people she'd raised him not to be. The phone rang, interrupting my reading. It was Sarah Chen, my accountant. Adrian, I've been reviewing the Blake Industries books like you asked, she said without preamble. There are some serious discrepancies. Your father has been paying himself and Marcus substantially more than board-approved salaries, and there's a shell company that's been receiving payments disguised as vendor costs. How much are we talking about? Over the past 5 years? Roughly $12 million that should have gone to shareholders or been reinvested in the company. I closed my eyes, absorbing this new betrayal. My father hadn't just stolen from the business. He'd stolen from every employee who depended on Blake Industries for their livelihood, from every shareholder who trusted him with their investment. Sarah, I need you to prepare a complete audit. Every transaction for the past 10 years. Can you do that quietly? I can. But Adrian, if this is what I think it is, you're talking about potentially criminal charges. Are you sure you want to go down this road? I thought about my grandmother, about how she must have felt watching her son become the kind of man who would rob his own company. I thought about all the employees I'd worked alongside, good people who had no idea their retirement funds were being drained. And I thought about that dinner table, about 23 people laughing at my humiliation. I'm sure. Send me everything by tomorrow evening. The rest of Friday passed in a blur of phone calls and document reviews. Daniel Morrison, my lawyer, confirmed that everything Margaret had given me was legally obtained and could be used in court. He also discovered that my father had been planning to force me out of Blake Industries entirely, using the inheritance drama as justification. They're going to announce your termination at Monday's board meeting, Daniel told me. Richard has already drafted the press release. They're framing it as you leaving to pursue other opportunities after being passed over for the inheritance. Can they do that? Legally, it's complicated. You're an executive, but you don't have an employment contract. However, given your grandmother's shareholdings that now belong to you, you actually control 38% of Blake Industries. Your father only controls 42%. The remaining 20% is split among smaller shareholders. This was news to me. My grandmother owned that much of the company? She was one of the original investors when your grandfather started it in 1962. She never sold her shares, just quietly held them while your father assumed he controlled everything. I leaned back in my chair, processing the this information. My grandmother had given me leverage I hadn't known existed. Not enough to control the company outright, but enough to make things very difficult for my father if I chose to. Friday evening, I drove to my grandmother's house in the suburbs. The estate lawyer had given me the keys, along with a handwritten note from Eleanor that simply said, "The piano bench." The house smelled like lavender and old books, exactly as I remembered it. I walked through rooms filled with memories, my footsteps echoing on hardwood floors. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, preserved as if she might walk through the door at any moment. The piano sat in the sunroom, an old Steinway that Eleanor had played every evening. I lifted the bench seat and found a leather journal, its pages filled with my grandmother's careful handwriting. "Dearest Adrian," the first entry began, dated 3 years ago. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone and your father has shown his true colors. I've suspected for years that he would eventually try to cut you out, to punish you for being different, for having a conscience that the rest of them seemed to lack." I sat on the piano bench and read page after page of her observations. She documented conversations, noted suspicious behaviors, recorded her growing concern about the family she'd helped create. But more than that, she'd written about me, about why she believed I was different. "You reminded me so much of my husband." One entry read, "George had that same kindness, that same inability to step on others to get ahead. He built Blake Industries on honest work and fair dealing. After he died, I watched Richard slowly corrupt everything George had created. I watched him teach his children that winning was all that mattered, that family was just another asset to be exploited. But you never learned those lessons, Adrian. You tried. God knows you tried to be what they wanted, but your heart was never in it. When you were 8 years old, you gave your birthday money to a homeless man outside the restaurant. When you were 16, you quit the football team because the coach was bullying a smaller player. When you were 25, you reported accounting irregularities at Blake Industries, even though it made your father furious. These aren't weaknesses, my dear boy. These are strengths, and I'm giving you the power to choose what kind of man you'll become. You can use what I've left you to destroy them, to take revenge for every cruel word and dismissive gesture, or you can walk away, build something new, and let them destroy themselves. The choice is yours. But know this, whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. You're the only Blake who became the person I hoped you'd be." I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. My grandmother had seen me, truly seen me, in a way no one else ever had. She'd understood that what my family called weakness was actually integrity, that what they mocked as softness was actually strength. Saturday morning, my phone exploded with messages. Marcus had posted on social media about the family dinner, carefully omitting the inheritance discussion, but making it clear I was no longer welcome in the inner circle. Several cousins had shared it, adding their own comments about how I'd always been the disappointment of the family. Then Diane called. "Adrian, you need to do damage control," she said without greeting. "Marcus's post is getting a lot of attention. People are asking questions about why you're suddenly out of family events. Let them ask. Don't be difficult. Father thinks you should release a statement saying you're stepping back for personal reasons. He's even willing to give you a modest severance from Blake Industries if you go quietly." How modest? 6 months' salary, and you keep your company car for another year. I almost laughed. After 12 years of building their company, after creating divisions that generated millions in annual revenue, they were offering me 6 months' salary to disappear quietly. Tell Father I decline. Adrian, don't be stupid. You have no leverage here. They're doing you a favor by offering you anything at all. Diane, do you know why grandmother left me the piano? What? What does that have to do with anything? She left me the piano because she knew I was the only one who appreciated it, the only one who'd actually play it instead of selling it for cash. Just like she knew I was the only one who'd understand what she really left me. What are you talking about? You'll find out Monday. Tell Father the board meeting should be very interesting. I hung up before she could respond. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I finalized everything with Daniel and Sarah. I contacted the other Blake Industries shareholders, the ones who weren't family, and had some very interesting conversations. I prepared documents, organized evidence, and made sure every piece was in place. Sunday evening, I sat in my apartment and thought about what I was about to do. I could still walk away, take my grandmother's money, start a new life somewhere else, and let the family drama play out without me. It would be easier, simpler, less painful. But then I remembered that dinner table. I remembered 23 people laughing at my humiliation. I remembered my father's cold eyes and my mother's cowardice. I remembered every time I'd been dismissed, diminished, and told I wasn't good enough. And I remembered my grandmother's words. "You're the only Blake who became the person I hoped you'd be." Monday morning arrived with gray skies and light rain. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the navy one my grandmother had bought me for my 30th birthday. I put on the watch she'd given me when I graduated from business school, the one engraved with "Trust yourself always." The Blake Industries board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. I arrived at 9:45, walking through the lobby where I'd worked for 12 years. Several employees looked surprised to see me, having probably heard rumors that I was leaving. A few smiled sympathetically, assuming I was there to clean out my office. The conference room on the 20th floor was already filling up. My father sat at the head of the table, Marcus on his right. Uncle Thomas and Aunt Patricia were there as board members, along with 6 other non-family directors. Diane sat near the back, her expression nervous. My father looked up when I entered, his face darkening. "Adrian, this meeting is for board members only." "I am a board member, Father. Or did you forget that grandmother's shares shares come with a board seat. His jaw tightened. We'll discuss the share transfer after we conclude today's business. Actually, I think we should discuss it now. I took a seat directly across from him, since my grandmother's shares are relevant to several items on today's agenda. Marcus leaned forward. Look, Adrian, we get it. You're upset about the inheritance, but dragging this out isn't going to change anything. You're right, Marcus. It's not going to change anything, because everything has already changed. You just don't know it yet. The other board members exchanged confused glances. Mr. Peterson, the CFO who wasn't family, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should begin the meeting. My father nodded curtly. First order of business. Adrian Blake's employment status. As you all know, there have been concerns about his fit with the company's direction going forward. Concerns you manufactured, I interrupted. Adrian, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm not making anything hard, Father. I'm making things clear. Before we discuss my employment, I think the board should know about some accounting irregularities I've discovered. The room went silent. My father's face reddened. This is neither the time nor the place. Actually, as a board member and shareholder, this is exactly the time and place. I pulled out a folder from my briefcase. Mr. Peterson, you might be particularly interested in these documents. They show a shell company that's been receiving payments from Blake Industries for the past 5 years. I slid copies across the table to each board member. Peterson's face went pale as he scanned the pages. The other non-family directors began murmuring among themselves. These payments total roughly $12 million, I continued. The shell company is registered to a post office box, but the actual account holder is very interesting. This is a private family matter, my father said sharply. No, Father, this is corporate fraud, and the board has a legal obligation to investigate it. What I didn't tell them yet was that I had evidence tying the shell company directly to Marcus, or that I had documentation of my father's salary manipulation, or that I knew about the pension fund skimming. I was giving them a taste, a preview of what was coming, and judging by the expressions around the table, they were starting to understand that this wasn't going to be the simple, quiet dismissal my father had planned. Mr. Peterson set down the documents with trembling hands. Richard, this is extremely serious. These payments were never disclosed to the board. If what Adrian is saying is true, we're looking at potential criminal liability. It's a misunderstanding, my father said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Adrian is clearly upset about personal matters and is trying to create problems where none exist. Then you won't mind if we conduct an independent audit? I asked calmly. I've already retained Chen and Associates to review all company finances for the past 10 years. They can start immediately if the board approves. Marcus stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Adrian, you're embarrassing yourself. Sit down, Marcus. My voice was quiet but firm. Because there's more, much more. I pulled out another folder, this one containing printouts of emails. These are communications between Marcus Blake and representatives from Garrison Industries, our primary competitor. In them, Marcus provides confidential information about our bids, our pricing strategies, and our client lists. That's a lie. Marcus's face went from red to white in seconds. Is it? Because I also have bank records showing payments from Garrison to an offshore account in your name, over $300,000 in the past 18 months. The room erupted. Directors were shouting questions. My father was trying to call for order, and Marcus looked like he might be sick. Diane sat frozen, her eyes wide with shock. This is absurd, my father finally managed to shout over the chaos. Adrian has manufactured these documents to discredit us. He's angry about being cut from the inheritance and is lashing out. Actually, Father, I'm not angry about the inheritance at all. I pulled out the final folder, the one from Margaret Winters, because I already received my inheritance, the real one. I slid a copy of Eleanor Blake's will across the table. Not the version my father had shown at dinner, but the actual legal document that had been filed with the court. The one that left me controlling interest in several trusts, properties, and investments worth over $300 million. This is impossible, my father whispered, staring at the document. Grandmother knew exactly what you'd become, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. She spent the last 10 years documenting every illegal thing you did, every corner you cut, every person you cheated. She gave me all of it, along with the resources to do something about it. But at dinner, Diane said weakly, you didn't say anything. You just left, because I wanted to see what you'd do, how far you'd go, and you didn't disappoint. You celebrated my humiliation. You mocked me. You showed me exactly who you were when you thought I had nothing. Mr. Peterson was reviewing the will with growing astonishment. Eleanor owned 38% of Blake Industries, and it now belongs to Adrian, along with documentation of every financial irregularity committed by my father and brother over the past decade, I confirmed. Which brings us to the real agenda for today's meeting. I'm calling for an emergency vote to remove Richard Blake as CEO and Marcus Blake as COO, pending a full investigation into their conduct. The room exploded again. My father was on his feet, shouting about family betrayal. Marcus was pale and shaking. Uncle Thomas and Aunt Patricia looked stunned, probably calculating how this would affect their own positions. You can't do this, my father said, his voice hoarse. I built this company. I made it what it is. Grandfather built this company, I corrected quietly. You've been slowly destroying it, stealing from it, using it as your personal bank account. Grandmother knew. She saw everything, and she gave me the power to stop you. One of the independent directors, Mrs. Harriet Chen, spoke up. Richard, I think you and Marcus should step out while we discuss this matter. This is my company. No, I said firmly. This is Marcus's Blake Industries, a company that belongs to its shareholders and owes a duty to its employees. You've treated it like your personal kingdom, but that ends today. Security had to escort my father and Marcus from the room. As they left, my father turned back, his face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this, Adrian. Family means everything, and you just destroyed ours." "You destroyed it," I replied. "At that dinner table, when you cut me out in front of everyone. When you made it clear that I was only valuable as long as I served your purposes. You taught me exactly what your version of family means, and I want no part of it." After they left, the remaining board members spent 3 hours reviewing the evidence I'd brought. Sarah Chen joined us via video call, walking through the financial discrepancies she'd discovered. Daniel Morrison explained the legal implications of the shell company payments and the offshore accounts. By 2 o'clock, the vote was unanimous. Richard Blake was suspended as CEO pending investigation. Marcus Blake was terminated immediately for corporate espionage and theft. An independent firm would conduct a complete audit of all company finances, and I was appointed interim CEO until the matter was resolved. I didn't want the position, I'd made that clear, but the board insisted that with my grandmother's shares and my knowledge of the company's operations, I was the logical choice to steady the ship while the investigation proceeded. As the meeting ended and board members filed out, several stopped to speak with me privately. Mr. Peterson gripped my hand firmly. "Your grandmother would be proud. This took real courage." Mrs. Chen was more direct. "I've suspected something was wrong for years, but I had no proof." Richard surrounded himself with yes-men and family members. "You just saved this company." But it was Mrs. Anderson, the oldest board member who'd known my grandfather, who said the words that hit hardest. George would have done the same thing. He believed in building something honest, something that helped people. "You're more his grandson than Richard ever was his son." I left the Blake Industries building at 4 o'clock and drove to my grandmother's house. I sat at her piano and finally let myself process everything that had happened. The betrayal, the discovery, the confrontation, the weight of what I'd just set in motion. My phone had been buzzing constantly with messages. Angry texts from my mother demanding I call her. Threatening voicemails from Uncle Thomas. A surprisingly sympathetic message from Diane asking if we could talk. And dozens of messages from cousins and extended family members who'd heard about the board meeting and wanted to know what was happening. I turned off my phone and played the piano. Chopin, my grandmother's favorite. The notes filled the empty house, echoing off walls that had once been filled with warmth and love, and now stood as a monument to what we'd lost. That evening, Daniel called my home line. "Adrian, you need to see the news." I turned on the television to find a business reporter standing outside Blake Industries headquarters. In a shocking development, longtime CEO Richard Blake has been suspended amid allegations of financial misconduct. His son, Adrian Blake, has been appointed interim CEO. Sources say the younger Blake presented evidence of systematic fraud to the board of directors earlier today. The story was everywhere. Financial networks, local news, social media. Within hours, Trust Blake Industries was trending, with people speculating about what had happened and what it meant for the company's future. My personal phone, still turned off, probably had hundreds of new messages, but I didn't need to read them to know what they said. My family would be in crisis mode, circling wagons, trying to figure out how to spin this or fight back. What they didn't know yet was that I'd also filed a complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission about the shell company payments, that I'd provided the FBI with evidence of Marcus's corporate espionage, that I'd given the state attorney general's office documentation of Uncle Thomas's pension fund theft. I wasn't just fighting back. I was ensuring that justice would be served, that the people who'd been hurt by my family's greed would see consequences. Tuesday morning, I returned to Blake Industries as its interim CEO. The atmosphere was tense. Some employees cheered my appointment, having heard rumors about my father's misconduct. Others were loyal to Richard Blake and viewed me as a traitor. Most were simply scared, worried about their jobs and the company's future. I called an all-hands meeting for noon. Nearly 800 employees gathered in the main auditorium, their faces showing every emotion from hope to fear to anger. "I know you're all worried," I began, standing on the stage where my father had given quarterly addresses for decades. "The past 24 hours have been chaotic, and I'm sure you've heard various versions of what happened at yesterday's board meeting. So let me tell you the truth. For the next 30 minutes, I laid out everything. The financial irregularities, the shell company payments, Marcus's information selling. I didn't spare my family, but I also didn't sensationalize. I presented facts, showed evidence, and explained what steps were being taken to investigate and correct the problems. I know some of you are wondering if your jobs are safe," I said near the end. "Let me be clear. Blake Industries is sound. We're profitable. We have strong client relationships and excellent products. What we had was a leadership problem, not a business problem. My goal is to protect this company and everyone who depends on it for their livelihood. Your pension funds are being reviewed by an independent auditor. Any money that was improperly taken will be returned, even if I have to cover it personally. Your health benefits will not change. Your salaries will not be cut. We're going to get through this together, and we're going to come out stronger." The applause was tentative at first, then grew. Not everyone was convinced, but I'd at least given them hope and honesty, two things my father had rarely provided. After the meeting, I spent hours in conference calls with clients and vendors, assuring them that Blake Industries remained committed to its contracts and obligations. Several major clients had been calling since the news broke, worried about the stability of their supplier. I had to convince each one that we were solid, that this was was about removing bad actors, not dismantling the company. Wednesday brought new challenges. My father's lawyer contacted Daniel with threats of a lawsuit for defamation and wrongful termination. Marcus sent a rambling email claiming I'd fabricated everything and that he'd prove it in court. Several family members showed up at the Blake Industries building, demanding to speak with me. I refused to see them. Instead, I worked. I reviewed every division, every contract, every financial statement. I met with department heads who'd been shut out of major decisions under my father's leadership. I listened to concerns from employees who'd been afraid to speak up before, and I discovered even more problems. Projects that had been approved without proper oversight. Vendor contracts that seemed to benefit companies owned by family friends. A culture of fear and favoritism that had rotted the organization from the inside. Thursday afternoon, my mother finally reached me. She showed up at the Blake Industries building and refused to leave until I agreed to see her. "Adrian, please," she said when I finally let her into my office. "You're tearing this family apart." "I didn't tear it apart, Mother. I just revealed what it already was." She sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk. She looked older than I'd ever seen her perfect hair slightly disheveled, her makeup not quite hiding the strain around her eyes. "Your father made mistakes," she said quietly, "but he doesn't deserve this public humiliation. And Marcus, he's your brother. How could you destroy his career? How could he sell company secrets to our competitors? How could father steal from employee pensions? How could you all sit at that dinner table and laugh at me? That was different. That was family business." "Exactly. In your world, family means you can do anything to each other without consequences. But I'm done living in that world, Mother. I'm done pretending that blood relation excuses cruelty." "So what now?" she asked, tears starting to form. "You're going to send your father to prison? Destroy Marcus's life? Turn your back on all of us?" "I'm going to let the legal system decide what happens to father and Marcus. If they broke the law, they'll face consequences. That's not revenge, Mother. That's justice. And us? Your family?" I looked at her. This woman who'd given birth to me but never really defended me, who'd stood by while her husband and children mocked and dismissed me for years. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Right now, I don't know if we have anything left to salvage." She left crying, and I felt something break inside me that I hadn't known was still intact. Some last hope that maybe, somehow, one of them would understand. That one person would say I was right, that what they'd done was wrong, that they were sorry. But no one did. Not my mother. Not Diane. Not any of the cousins or aunts or uncles. To them, I was the villain. The one who'd betrayed the family code. The one who'd chosen outsiders over blood. Friday brought the news I'd been both dreading and expecting. The SEC had opened a formal investigation into Blake Industries. The FBI had executed search warrants at my father's home and office. Criminal charges were likely within weeks. The media was having a field day. "Blake Dynasty crumbles," read one headline. "Son brings down father's empire," said another. My face was on every business news site. My story dissected by people who'd never met me and had no idea what had really happened. But underneath the sensationalism, something else was happening. Employees were coming forward with their own stories of my father's misconduct. Vendors were sharing experiences of being pressured to give kickbacks. Former Blake Industries workers were revealing why they'd left. Stories of harassment and retaliation that had been buried for years. My grandmother had been right. The corruption went deeper than even she had documented. And now that the light was shining on it, people who'd been silenced were finally finding their voices. That evening, I returned to my grandmother's house one final time before putting it on the market. I sat at her piano and found myself crying, really crying, for the first time since her funeral. I cried for the family I'd wanted but never had, for the grandmother who'd seen me clearly but couldn't save me from the pain of discovery, for the life I'd built on the foundation of people who never valued me, and for the loneliness of doing the right thing when everyone you've ever loved calls it wrong. But somewhere in those tears, I also found relief, freedom. The heavy weight of trying to earn unearnable approval was gone. I was no longer performing for an audience that would never applaud. I was finally, terrifyingly, completely myself, and that self was stronger than I'd ever known. 3 weeks after the board meeting, the walls finally closed in on my father and Marcus. Federal agents arrived at Richard Blake's estate at 6 in the morning with arrest warrants. By noon, both he and Marcus were in federal custody, charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. I learned about the arrests from the news, like everyone else. My phone exploded with calls from reporters, family members, and random people who thought they had a right to my story. I ignored them all and drove to Blake Industries, where I knew the real chaos would be unfolding. The lobby was packed with news crews. I had to push through a wall of microphones and shouted questions to reach the elevators. "Mr. Blake, how do you feel about your father's arrest? Did you cooperate with federal investigators? Is this about revenge or justice?" I didn't answer any of them. What could I say that they would understand? That justice and revenge sometimes look the same from the outside but feel completely different from the inside. That I took no pleasure in seeing my father in handcuffs, even though I knew he deserved it. The emergency board meeting that afternoon was tense. Several directors were worried about the company's reputation, about client confidence, about stock prices that had dropped 15% since the scandal broke. Uncle Thomas, still clinging to his board seat by a thread, tried to blame me for the crisis. "This is all your fault, Adrian," he said, his face red with anger. "If you'd just kept quiet, handled this privately, none of this would have happened." "You mean if I'd let them continue stealing? I asked calmly. If I'd protected criminals because they were family? That's not how this works, Thomas. Actions have consequences. Easy for you to say. You got everything. The inheritance, the company, while the rest of us are left to deal with the fallout of your vindictiveness. Mrs. Chen, who'd become an unexpected ally, cut him off sharply. Thomas, Adrian exposed serious crimes. Crimes that were costing this company and its employees millions of dollars. If you can't see the difference between whistleblowing and vindictiveness, perhaps you shouldn't be on this board either. The audit had revealed even more than I'd initially discovered. Uncle Thomas had indeed been skimming from the pension fund, roughly $2.3 million over 15 years. The evidence was overwhelming, and his lawyer had already been in touch with prosecutors about a possible plea deal. In fact, Mrs. Chen continued, I'm calling for a vote to remove Thomas Blake from the board, effective immediately. Thomas's face went from red to purple. You can't do this. I'm family. That's exactly the problem, Mr. Peterson said quietly. This board has been controlled by family for too long, with no real oversight or accountability. It's time for that to change. The vote was 8-2 in favor of removal. Thomas stormed out, shouting threats about lawsuits and revenge, but his bluster couldn't hide what we all knew. He was finished, just like my father and Marcus. After the meeting, I returned to my office to find Diane waiting outside. She looked terrible, her usually perfect appearance disheveled, her eyes red from crying. Can we talk? She asked quietly. I let her in, closing the door behind us. She sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk, the same chair where my mother had sat a few weeks earlier. Stephen left me, she said without preamble. He said he can't be associated with the Blake family drama, that it's hurting his career. I'm sorry. Are you? She looked up, her eyes challenging. Because you've destroyed everything. Father's in jail. Marcus is facing 20 years in prison. Mother's had to leave the country club because everyone's gossiping about her. And now my marriage is over. Diane, I didn't destroy your marriage. Stephen did, by choosing his career over his wife. And I didn't put father in jail. His crimes did. But you could have handled it differently. You could have given them a chance to fix things quietly. You didn't have to go nuclear. I leaned back in my chair, studying my sister. She'd always been the perfect daughter, the one who followed every rule and met every expectation. She'd married the right man, said the right things, wore the right clothes, and now her carefully constructed life was falling apart. What would you have done, Diane, if you discovered all of this? What would you have done? I would have talked to father privately, given him a chance to make things right. He had years to make things right. He chose not to. And meanwhile, hundreds of employees were losing their retirement savings. The company was being gutted from the inside. How many more years should I have given him? She had no answer to that. We sat in silence for a long moment before she spoke again, her voice smaller. I keep thinking about that dinner, about how we all laughed at you. I knew it was wrong, Adrian. Even as I was doing it, I knew it was cruel, but I didn't stop them. I didn't defend you. No, you didn't. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. You didn't deserve that. It was the first real apology I'd received from anyone in my family. Not an excuse, not a justification, just a simple acknowledgement of harm done. Thank you for saying that, I told her. It doesn't change what happened, but it matters that you said it. She nodded, wiping her eyes. What's going to happen to them? Father and Marcus? That's up to the courts now. The federal prosecutors have solid cases. Father will probably take a plea deal to avoid trial. Marcus's situation is more complicated because of the corporate espionage charges. The FBI is still building that case. And us? What happens to the family? I thought about my grandmother's journal, about her words regarding family drama and choosing who you become. I don't know, Diane. Maybe some families can't be saved. Maybe some relationships are too broken to repair. Do you hate us? The question surprised me. I'd expected anger from my family, blame, accusations, but not this vulnerability, this genuine question about whether I still felt anything for them beyond rage. No, I said honestly. I don't hate you. I'm angry. I'm hurt, but I don't hate you. Hate requires caring what you think of me, and I don't anymore. You all made it very clear that I was only valuable as long as I served your purposes. Now I know exactly where I stand, and I'm okay with that. Diane left shortly after, and I was alone with my thoughts and the weight of everything that had happened. The federal charges, the media circus, the family destruction. I'd set all of this in motion when I decided to expose the truth, and now I had to live with the consequences. That evening, Daniel called with news. Adrian, your father's lawyer reached out. Richard wants to meet with you. Why? He wouldn't say, but I think he's trying to work out a plea deal and wants to talk to you first. I agreed to the meeting, more out of curiosity than any desire for reconciliation. We met at Daniel's office 2 days later, my father wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual expensive suits, his hands shackled in front of him. He looked older, diminished. The command and authority that had defined him were gone, replaced by a hunted wariness. We sat across from each other in the conference room. Lawyers present, recording everything. Adrian, he began, his voice hoarse. I want you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. Which part? The embezzlement? The pension fund theft? Or publicly humiliating me at a family dinner? He flinched. The dinner was a mistake. I was angry about Eleanor's will, about discovering she'd kept so much from me. I took it out on you, and that was wrong. You were angry that grandmother saw through you. I corrected, that she knew exactly what you'd become, and chose to protect her legacy from you. She was my mother. You deserved exactly what she gave you. I interrupted. Nothing. Because you earned nothing. You built your success on theft and lies and taking advantage of people who trusted you. His lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Blake, my client is prepared to cooperate fully with the investigation. information. He'll testify about any other parties involved, provide documentation, whatever is needed. In exchange, the prosecutors are willing to recommend a reduced sentence. And you want what from me? I asked my father. I want you to speak on my behalf, he said quietly, to tell the judge that I'm not a monster, that I made mistakes, but that I'm still your father. The audacity of the request left me momentarily speechless. He wanted me, the son he'd publicly disowned and humiliated, to help him avoid the consequences of his crimes. No, I said simply. Adrian, please. I'm looking at 15 to 20 years in prison. I'll be an old man when I get out. If I get out. You have influence now. The judge would listen to you. You're right, father. The judge probably would listen to me, which is why I'm going to tell them exactly what kind of man you are. How you stole from employees who trusted you. How you taught your children that winning was all that mattered. That family was just another tool to be used. How you created a culture of corruption that poisoned everything you touched. His face hardened. So this is your revenge. You're going to make sure I die in prison. This isn't revenge, I said, standing up. This is you finally facing the consequences of your choices. You had decades to be a better man, a better father. You chose not to. Now you get to live with that choice. As I reached the door, he called out, "Your grandmother would be ashamed of what you've become." I turned back, looking at this man who'd shaped so much of my life, for better and worse. No, father. She'd be ashamed of what you became, and she'd be proud that I had the courage to stop you. The trial, when it finally happened 3 months later, was a media spectacle. Reporters packed the courtroom. Every detail of the Blake family drama was dissected in real time on social media. My father's lawyers fought hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. I attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery where my father could see me. I wanted him to know that I wasn't hiding, that I wasn't ashamed of what I'd done. Several times, he tried to catch my eye, perhaps hoping for some sign of weakness or regret. I gave him nothing. The prosecution called me as a witness. I testified about discovering the financial irregularities, about my grandmother's documentation, about the systematic theft that had gone on for years. I kept my emotions in check, presenting facts rather than feelings. My father's lawyer tried to paint me as a vengeful son, motivated by hurt feelings rather than genuine concern. But the numbers didn't lie. 2.3 million from the pension fund, 12 million from the shell company, hundreds of thousands in improper compensation. The defense crumbled under the weight of evidence. When the verdict came down, guilty on all counts, I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no relief. Just a quiet recognition that justice had been served, that the system had worked. The judge sentenced my father to 12 years in federal prison. Marcus, whose trial came later, received 8 years. Uncle Thomas took a plea deal for 3 years. The Blake family dynasty, built over 3 generations, had effectively ended. As I left the courthouse that day, pushing through crowds of reporters, I thought about my grandmother, about how she'd spent her final years documenting the corruption, knowing that someday it would all come to light. She'd given me the tools to bring down the family business, knowing exactly what it would cost me. But she'd also given me something more valuable, the knowledge that I was strong enough to do what needed to be done, even when it hurt, even when it made me the villain in everyone else's story, even when it meant standing completely alone. 6 months after the trial, Blake Industries was thriving in ways it never had under my father's leadership. The independent audit had cleaned house, removing corrupt practices and establishing real oversight. Employee morale was higher than it had been in years. We'd landed 3 major contracts that my father had lost because clients didn't trust his word. But success came with a price. I worked 16-hour days, rebuilding trust with clients, restructuring departments, implementing ethics training. Every decision was scrutinized by the media, every move analyzed for signs that I was like my father. I had to be perfect, flawless, beyond reproach. The isolation was the hardest part. My family had completely cut me off. My mother refused to speak to me, blaming me for her husband's imprisonment. Marcus's wife sent me a letter calling me a traitor who'd destroyed her children's future. Cousins who'd once invited me to holidays now pretended I didn't exist. Even Diane, who'd apologized, kept her distance. Her divorce was finalized, and she'd moved to California to start over. We exchanged occasional texts, surface-level pleasantries that avoided anything real. The sister I'd grown up with was gone, replaced by a polite stranger who shared my DNA but nothing else. One evening in late November, I found myself at my grandmother's grave for the first time since the trial. I'd sold her house, unable to bear the memories, but I'd kept the piano and her journals. The gravestone was simple, elegant, exactly what she would have wanted. "I did what you asked," I told the stone, feeling foolish talking to granite but needing to say the words anyway. "I stopped them. The company is clean now. The employees are protected, and father will spend the next decade paying for what he did. But grandmother, it hurts so much more than I expected." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and approaching winter. I sat on the ground beside her grave, not caring about my expensive suit or what anyone would think. "I'm so alone," I continued, the words catching in my throat. "Everyone thinks I'm either a hero or a villain, but no one sees me as just Adrian, just your grandson who misses you and wishes you were here to tell me if I did the right thing." I stayed there until dark, talking to her about everything that had happened, about the loneliness and the doubt and the moments when I wondered if I should have just walked away, let them destroy themselves without my help, started fresh somewhere else where the Blake name meant nothing. But I knew, even as I questioned it, that I couldn't have done things differently, not and lived with myself afterward. My grandmother had raised me to stand up for what was right, even when it cost everything, especially especially when it cost everything. As winter settled over the city, I made a decision. Blake Industries didn't need me anymore. The company was stable, the board was strong, and continuing as CEO was holding me back more than helping. At the December board meeting, I announced my resignation. I'll stay through the transition, I told the shock directors. Help select and train my replacement. But it's time for Blake Industries to have a leader who isn't connected to the family drama, who can move the company forward without the weight of the past. Mrs. Chen was the first to speak. Adrian, you've saved this company. You can't just walk away. I'm not walking away. I'm setting it free. As long as I'm CEO, Blake Industries will always be about the scandal, about the family betrayal, about father versus son. The company deserves better than that. The board accepted my resignation reluctantly, understanding even if they didn't fully agree. We found an excellent replacement, a woman named Patricia Rodriguez, who'd built 2 successful manufacturing companies and had a reputation for ethical leadership and innovation. On my last day as CEO, the employees threw me a surprise party in the main auditorium. Nearly 500 people showed up, many of them workers whose pensions I'd helped restore, whose jobs I'd protected during the crisis. A man named Tom Patterson, who'd worked on the factory floor for 30 years, spoke on behalf of the employees. Mr. Blake, my father worked for your grandfather back in the 60s. He always said George Blake was a man of integrity, someone who kept his word and treated workers fairly. When your father took over, things changed. We felt it, even if we couldn't prove it. But you brought back what made this company great. You stood up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. That takes guts. Another woman, Maria Gonzalez from accounting, added her voice. My retirement fund was nearly empty when you took over. I was 58 years old and looking at having to work until I died because someone stole my future. You gave that back to me. You gave all of us back our dignity. We won't forget that. I struggled to find words, overcome by their gratitude for simply doing what should have been done all along. I didn't do this for thanks, I finally managed. I did it because it was right. Because people who work hard and play by the rules deserve to be treated fairly. That's not heroic. That's basic decency. But to them, it was heroism. And maybe that said more about how low the bar had fallen than about how high I'd risen. After the party, I cleared out my office, packing away the few personal items I'd brought. The photo of my grandmother, the watch she'd given me, her journal, which I'd read so many times the spine was cracked and the pages worn soft. As I was leaving, Mr. Peterson caught up with me in the lobby. Adrian, before you go, there's something you should know. We've been contacted by several other companies, ones that heard about what you did here. They want you to come work for them, help clean up their organizations like you cleaned up ours. I'm not interested in being a corporate savior, I said. I didn't think so, but there's another option. Some investors want to back you in starting your own consulting firm. Ethics and governance, helping companies build honest systems before problems arise. They've already committed $15 million in seed funding if you're interested. I thought about it. A chance to use what I'd learned, to help prevent other families from destroying themselves the way mine had, to build something new that wasn't tainted by the Blake name or legacy. Send me the information, I told him. I'll think about it. Christmas approached, the first I'd spend entirely alone. Previous years had been filled with elaborate Blake family gatherings, forced joviality, and expensive gifts that substituted for genuine affection. This year, my phone stayed silent. No invitations, no cards, nothing. On Christmas Eve, I sat in my apartment with takeout Chinese food and my grandmother's piano, which I'd had moved from her house. I played for hours, letting the music fill the emptiness. Chopin and Debussy and Bach, composers who understood that beauty and sorrow often walked hand in hand. A knock at my door interrupted me around 9 o'clock. I opened it to find Diane standing in the hallway, holding a small wrapped box. "Merry Christmas," she said, awkwardly. "I know we haven't really talked, but I was in town and thought, I don't know. I thought maybe we could at least acknowledge the holiday." I let her in. We sat on my couch, the wrapped gift between us, neither quite knowing what to say. "How's California?" I asked finally. "Good. Different. I'm working at a nonprofit now, helping domestic abuse survivors. It's not glamorous, but it matters." "That's wonderful, Diane." She picked up the gift, turning it over in her hands. "I've been thinking a lot about that dinner, about how we all treated you. I told you I was sorry, but I don't think I really understood what that meant until I started this job. I see women every day who've been diminished and dismissed by their families, and I realize that's what we did to you for years." "Diane, no, let me finish. You were right to do what you did. It took me a long time to see it, but you were right. Father was stealing. Marcus was selling secrets. We were all complicit, either actively or by staying silent. You were the only one brave enough to stop it." She handed me the gift. This was grandmother's. I took it from her house before it sold, thinking I deserved it more than you did, but I was wrong. I unwrapped the box to find a pocket watch, gold and elegant, engraved with my grandfather's initials. I'd seen my grandmother wear it on a chain around her neck my entire childhood. She told me once that grandfather carried this every day of his life, Diane said softly, that it reminded him to value his time, to spend it on things that mattered. I think she'd want you to have it. I held the watch, feeling the weight of 3 generations in my palm. "Thank you. This means more than you know." We spent the next few hours talking, really talking, for the first time in years, about our childhood, about the family dysfunction we'd both seen but handled differently, about her divorce and my isolation and the price we'd both paid for being born into the Blake family. "I can't fix the past," Diane said as she was leaving, "and I don't know if the rest of them will ever come around. Mother is still furious. Marcus blames you for everything, but I wanted you to know know that I see what you did, and I'm proud to be your sister, even if I wasn't before." After she left, I sat with the pocket watch, opening it to find a photograph inside. My grandfather and grandmother on their wedding day, young and full of hope, unaware of how their legacy would eventually crumble. On New Year's Eve, I made my decision about the consulting firm. I would do it, but on my terms. No taking on corrupt companies trying to whitewash their reputations, only working with organizations genuinely committed to change, and donating half the profits to employee advocacy groups and pension protection funds. I called it Blake Integrity Solutions, deliberately keeping the family name, not to honor my father, but to remind myself every day what integrity actually meant, what it cost, what it was worth. The firm launched in February, and within 3 months we had more clients than we could handle. Companies that wanted to avoid becoming the next Blake Industries. Leaders who recognized that short-term gains from cutting corners led to long-term disaster. I hired carefully, building a team of former compliance officers, reformed corporate whistleblowers, and ethics professors. People who understood that doing the right thing was often the hardest path. We became known for our uncompromising standards and our willingness to walk away from lucrative contracts if a client wasn't genuinely committed to change. My father, I heard through the legal grapevine, was not handling prison well. He'd been moved twice for his own protection after altercations with other inmates. His lawyers had tried several appeals, all unsuccessful. He would serve his full sentence with no possibility of early release. Marcus was in a different facility, reportedly spending his time in the prison library, working on a memoir about being betrayed by his brother. I had no doubt it would paint me as the villain and himself as the victim. I didn't care. The truth was documented in court records that would outlast any revisionist autobiography. 2 years after that fateful dinner at Belmont Manor, I found myself standing in the same dining room, though under very different circumstances. The estate had been sold to pay restitution to Blake Industries employees, but the new owners had agreed to let me visit one last time before renovations began. The mahogany table was still there, though covered in dust now. I ran my hand along its surface, remembering the faces of 23 relatives who'd laughed at my humiliation. Most of them had scattered to different parts of the country, avoiding each other and the scandal that had destroyed their comfortable lives. Uncle Thomas had served 18 months of his 3-year sentence before being released for good behavior. He worked as a night manager at a grocery store now, his law license revoked, his reputation destroyed. Aunt Patricia had divorced him, taking what little remained of their assets and moving to Arizona. Cousin Jennifer had lost her position at a prestigious marketing firm when her association with the Blake family became too much of a liability. She'd written me a scathing letter, blaming me for ruining her career. I'd read it once and thrown it away. Some people would never take responsibility for their own choices. My mother had finally contacted me 3 months ago, after 2 years of silence. She wanted money, claiming she couldn't maintain her lifestyle on the modest income from her remaining assets. I'd refused, gently but firmly. She'd made her choice at that dinner table when she sat silent while everyone mocked me. Now she lived with the consequences in a small apartment, working part-time as a receptionist. Marcus would be released from prison in 6 more years. I'd heard he'd found religion inside, attending chapel services and Bible study groups. Whether his transformation was genuine or a bid for early parole, I couldn't say. Either way, he was someone else's concern now, not mine. My father had 4 more years on his sentence. He'd written me several times, letters that started angry and gradually became more pleading. He wanted forgiveness, reconciliation, a relationship with his grandchildren he'd never have. I read each letter once and filed them away, unanswered. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. Diane had become my only real connection to the Blake family. She visited twice a year, and we talked on the phone monthly. She'd built a good life in California, married a kind man who taught high school history, and found purpose in her work with abuse survivors. She understood now what I'd known all along, that enabling bad behavior in the name of family loyalty only created more victims. Blake Integrity Solutions had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We employed 32 people now, and worked with companies across the country. The consulting firm had prevented 3 major corporate fraud cases by implementing oversight systems before problems could metastasize. We'd saved countless jobs and protected employee pensions at a dozen companies. But more than the professional success, I'd found something I hadn't expected: a new family. My team wasn't bound by blood or obligation. They chose to be there, chose to work towards something meaningful, chose to stand for integrity, even when it cost them easier, more lucrative opportunities. Sarah Chen, my original accountant, had become the firm's CFO and my closest friend. Daniel Morrison served as our general counsel, having left his partnership at a major law firm to join our mission. Together with a dozen other professionals who'd been whistleblowers or ethics officers at various companies, we'd built something my grandmother would have been proud of. I'd also started dating again, cautiously. Her name was Rebecca, and she was a professor of business ethics at the local university. She knew my history, had even written a case study about the Blake Industries scandal for her classes. But she saw me as Adrian, not as the son who'd destroyed his family or the whistleblower who'd brought down a dynasty. "You did what was necessary," she told me on our 3rd date. "But you also did what was kind. You gave those employees their pensions back. You protected people who couldn't protect themselves. That's not villainy, no matter how your family wants to frame it." Standing in that empty dining room now, I pulled out my grandfather's pocket watch and checked the time. In an hour, I had a meeting with a potential client, a family-owned manufacturing company, whose CEO suspected his brothers of financial impropriety. History repeating itself, in different clothes but the same painful patterns. I would help them if I could, show them how to investigate without destroying, how to demand accountability without losing everything. Maybe I could spare them some of the pain I'd experienced. Maybe I could help them find a different path than the scorched earth I'd had to walk. As I turned to leave, I noticed something scratched into the table's surface, hidden under the dust. Someone had carved words there, probably decades ago. I wiped away the grime to read, "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." I smiled at that. My grandmother's handwriting. She must have carved it here years ago, perhaps during one of the many family dinners where she watched her son's corruption grow unchecked. A reminder to herself, or a message to whomever would eventually need it. The truth had made me miserable. It had cost me my family, my naivety, my belief that blood meant loyalty. But it had also set me free from the weight of enabling evil, from the prison of others' expectations, from the lie that family harmony was worth any price. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Dinner tonight? I'm cooking." Below it, a photo of her in her kitchen, smiling at the camera, flour on her cheek from whatever she was baking. I typed back, "Absolutely, I'll bring wine." This was my family now. People who chose me, who saw my worth without needing an inheritance or a last name to validate it. People who stood for something beyond their own comfort and convenience. As I locked the door to Belmont Manor for the final time, I felt my grandmother's presence, as surely as if she were standing beside me. I could almost hear her voice, proud and strong. "You did well, Adrian. You became the man I always knew you could be." The watch ticked steadily in my pocket, measuring out seconds and minutes and hours that I would spend building something better than what I'd inherited. Not a dynasty built on theft and lies, but a legacy built on truth and integrity, and the courage to stand alone when standing together meant betraying everything that mattered. I got in my car and drove away from the Blake family estate, leaving behind the ghosts of dinners past and the echoes of laughter that had once broken me. The rearview mirror showed the mansion growing smaller, its windows dark and empty, a monument to the family that had chosen greed over integrity. Ahead, the road stretched toward a future I was building one honest choice at a time, toward Rebecca and dinner and the simple joy of being with someone who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide, toward work that mattered and colleagues who shared my values, toward a life where family meant something deeper than blood and inheritance meant more than money. I thought about that dinner 2 years ago, about my father standing to announce my disinheritance while everyone laughed. I thought about how I'd smiled, taken a sip of wine, and quietly left. At the time, I hadn't known what that smile meant, what I was walking toward or away from. Now I knew. That smile was the beginning of my freedom. That quiet departure was the first step toward becoming myself. And those 2 days before the chaos began were the last moments of my old life, the life where I tried to earn love from people incapable of giving it. The new life, the one I'd built from the ruins of family drama and corporate fraud, wasn't perfect. I still had moments of loneliness, nights when I wondered if I could have handled things differently. But I also had purpose, integrity, and the knowledge that I'd done the right thing even when it cost me everything. My grandmother's journal sat on the passenger seat, and I opened it to a random page at a stoplight. Her words, written 3 years before her death, seemed to speak directly to this moment. "Adrian, if you're reading this, you've already faced the hardest choice of your life. You've chosen truth over comfort, integrity over acceptance. The road ahead won't be easy, but it will be yours. And that, my dear boy, is the greatest inheritance I could ever give you." The light turned green, and I drove forward into my future, carrying nothing but the lessons learned and the strength gained from standing up when everyone else sat down. The Blake family drama would fade into history, becoming another cautionary tale about greed and betrayal. But I would continue, building and growing and proving every day that character matters more than bloodline, that integrity is worth any sacrifice, and that sometimes the greatest love is knowing when to walk away. $300 million sat in accounts I rarely touched, my grandmother's fortune that could have made my life easy and comfortable. Instead, I worked 60-hour weeks building something that mattered, something that helped prevent other families from destroying themselves the way mine had. Because in the end, I'd learned that inheritance wasn't about money or property or family names. It was about values and principles and the courage to live by them, even when everyone you've ever loved calls you wrong for being right. My phone rang as I pulled into my office parking lot. It was Diane, her voice excited. "Adrian, you won't believe this. I just got off the phone with Sarah. Blake Integrity Solutions has been nominated for the Ethics in Business Award by the National Commerce Association. That's huge. That's the team's accomplishment, not mine," I said, meaning it. "They're the ones doing the hard work every day. Adrian, stop deflecting. You built this. You took the worst situation imaginable and created something good from it. That matters. It really matters." After we hung up, I sat in my car for a moment, letting her words sink in. 2 years ago, I'd stood at my grandmother's grave, broken and alone, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. Now I was building something that would outlast the scandal, that would help protect others from experiencing what I'd experienced. The Blake family had taught me what I didn't want to be. My grandmother had shown me what I could be, and I'd found the strength to choose my own path, even when that path led through fire and loss and the complete destruction of everything I'd once thought mattered. I wasn't the victim of family betrayal anymore. I wasn't the son who'd been cut out of the inheritance. I was Adrian Blake, founder founder of Blake Integrity Solutions, partner to a woman who saw my worth, friend to people who chose integrity over comfort, and guardian of my grandmother's true legacy, the belief that doing the right thing, no matter the cost, was always worth it. That dinner at Belmont Manor, the laughter, the humiliation, the quiet departure, all of it had led to this moment. Standing in a parking lot on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, about to walk into an office where people respected me, where my work mattered, where family meant something deeper than blood. I'd taken a sip of wine, smiled, and left. 2 days later, I'd begun the process of destroying the family that had destroyed me first. But in the rubble and ash of that destruction, I'd found something unexpected. Myself. Not the version of Adrian that tried to please everyone. Not the son desperate for approval, but the man I was always meant to be. And that man was standing in the sunlight, holding his grandfather's watch, carrying his grandmother's legacy, building a future that honored everything good about the Blake name while rejecting everything corrupt. The inheritance everyone had fought over at that dinner was nothing compared to what I'd truly received. The freedom to choose integrity over acceptance, truth over comfort, and myself over the expectations of people who'd never valued me anyway. I locked my car and walked toward my office, where my team waited to celebrate the nomination and plan our next case. Behind me, the Blake family drama faded into memory. Ahead, a life built on my own terms, with my own values, surrounded by people who'd earned my love and given theirs freely in return. That was the real inheritance. That was what my grandmother had given me when she documented every crime and left me the choice of what to do with the truth. Not revenge, but liberation. Not destruction for its own sake, but the clearing away of corruption to make room for something better. I'd smiled at that dinner table because somewhere deep inside, I'd already known I was stronger than they realized. I'd known that whatever they took from me, they couldn't take who I was at my core. And I'd known, though I couldn't have articulated it then, that their rejection was actually my freedom. 2 years later, walking into an office where ethics and integrity weren't just words but daily practice, I understood that my grandmother's greatest gift wasn't the money or the evidence or even the justice served. It was the belief that I had the strength to do what needed to be done, even if I had to do it alone. I wasn't alone anymore, but I'd learned I could be, if necessary. And that knowledge, that certainty of my own strength and worth, was the inheritance no one could ever take away. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you found yourself in a situation where the people who should support you became the very ones tearing you down? Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most meaningful transformations. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true stories about finding strength in the most difficult circumstances. Thank you for listening to my journey.